Hey folks, Valentin the Mad here, and today we'll be comparing Gore mods in GMOD, and specifically Litegibs by TFA, Next Gen Blood Effects, the first version by GalaxyHighMarshall, and Gibsplat 2 by Rama. Mods that caught my interest in one way or the other, and that I have covered in demonstration videos on the channel. In this video, I'll be taking some of my favorite tests from those demos, I'll be running them on all 3 mods to see how they compare, and I'll be discussing some of the features and issues as seen in those tests. So, let's get right to it. So test number 1 is 357 versus head, and we'll begin with Litegibs. And here you can immediately see all of the coolest features. So first up you have the remains. Those are taken from Fallout New Vegas, and they look real cool. Then you see a blood trail following the character, and you see a puddle below the head stump. Now this blood trail is what got my attention about this mod in the first place. I'm a big fan of this feature of a trail following the character from where he was hit to where he landed, and as you can see, that can deliver really cool results. Now I should note that the blood trail, the puddle, and some additional stains are particles, not decals, and those vanish based on a time limit. A few more things I should mention. In some cases, you will see additional decals spawn below the stump. Most aspects of this mod are configurable. You have 3 main configs, but you can dive much deeper. That includes stuff like the particle blood time limit, the Gibbs time limit, and a lot more. And I should note that I have encountered some activation issues on this test. On the fatal hit you won't always see Dismemberment activated when it should, but post-mortally it works mostly fine. I have 2 examples for you. Now we have Next Gen Blood Effects, and this mod is all about non-dismembering damage and blood on the environment. As you can see, many droplets with some size difference are spawned, and there's a very nice and nasty looking wound on the character. A few more things I need to note. The mod will also spawn decals, and as you can see, it comes with custom stains. The droplets and the blood pools are particles, but the blood pools will stay much longer. Unlike the other mods though, there are no configs in this one. And, as you can see, there is some weird lighting response issue, which you'll see most commonly on the blood pools. The next one is Gibsplat 2, and as you can see, it features Dismemberment, a lot of blood drops spawned, those are also particles, and a very excessive splash effect. The particle blood lifetime, how many of those are spawned, and many other aspects of the mod can be configured, but no matter what you set there, you'll still get this absolutely massive splash. In test number 2 we'll be having a deeper look at dismemberment effects, and once again we go with Litegibs. So you have 3 points of amputation for each limb, they can either be dismembered or destroyed. The head can come off, and you can obliterate the upper torso, or cut the character in half. A very cool aspect of it is the gibs. You have specific ones for the head, and for the limbs. As for the stumps, there is no stump model sticking out. What you have is removal of the desired body part and activation of the non-dismembering damage. Each character has a bottom layer of bloody flesh and bones, and on hits the character takes, you'll see a sphere appear, revealing the bottom layer. Now the bottom layer itself looks real good, but the issue is the way it's revealed, and it's basically like a window through a paper-thin wall into his insides. And that just looks plain wrong. Once again, I like the bottom layer, I'm a big fan of multi-layer damage features, but the way it's revealed, it just doesn't work. You can however disable it if you wish. Now since there is no dismemberment in next-gen blood effects, we're going straight to Gibsplat 2. Here also, each limb has 3 points of amputation, but they don't always come off immediately. A key feature in the mod is a partial dismemberment mechanic. The severed limb will be hanging loosely by its stump, which is a very cool and a very uncommon feature. By just having different damage thresholds for partial dismemberment and complete severing, you suddenly get a lot more variety to response, within the same amount of points of amputation. This mod does feature different stumps for different body parts, and those look decently well. But the biggest issue is of course the fleshy overlay around it, which doesn't look good at all, with the rough cuts and the way the overlay itself kind of looks. But you know, despite the roughness, taking into account that it's a mod with universal stumps, you know, they have to work for all characters, there is no special fitting for every single character. It's done on a very old engine, once again by a modder, and you have the partial dismemberment, which is a feature you see almost nowhere. So, all things considered, honestly, I find this to be pretty bloody impressive. The next test is sending a rocket into a character. Litegibs first. As you can see, there's the issue of dismemberment activation on the fatal hit, so he gets himself a second one. What you'll see here is that many parts of his body get obliterated, and those turn into chunks that stain the environment. That, in my opinion, is the coolest thing about this instance in Litegibs. Or the decal staining from all of those chunks. And now we have next-gen blood effects, and as I mentioned, no dismemberment here, so what you'll see is many droplets, some decals, and the blood pool. There's also an issue visible here. You see this line of droplets right by the couch? The droplets, they don't stick to surfaces, so they were formed, they hit the couch and they fell down. They didn't stick to it, didn't stick to the sides of it. So yeah, that's an issue. Moving on to Gibsplat. There are two key differences you can see between this and Litegibs. So first of all, far less blood decals are spawned. And the body parts, they tend to get dismembered, rather than being obliterated. Now we have the drop test, and once again, we begin with Litegibs. As you could see previously, dismemberment does get activated on blunt impacts, so we have that, we have some blood trails, we have additional particle bloodstains in a kind of explosive pattern, and of course decals spawned by the bits and pieces. Moving on to next gen blood effects. So you have a great deal of particle blood drops. There's a stain that was actually caused by the gunshot, and there's a blood pool below him. And lastly we have Gibsplat, and this is where this mod shines. That's where the partial dismemberment delivers really brutal response. As you could also see in the demo video, he fell and it looked like his back got split open, which is so fucking brutal. And this is really a thing I would like to see more often in games. Aside from the fact that you have more variety of response for explosives and shotguns and such, for something like a long fall, this really is quite awesome. And if making specific variations of bones sticking out on arms and legs is too much, this is basically the next best thing. If you think about it, fall damage in most games is really quite disappointing. Some will spawn a stain where the character landed, but by the damage wise, in most games I can think of, you basically have nothing really. And that's perhaps the reason why this response stands out so much. Moving on to non-dismembering responses. So as I mentioned, in Litegibs, it opens a window through which you can look at the character's insides and bone structure. Now when it comes to next gen blood effects, this is where this mod shines. So you'll see a hole with some bump mapping to it, but the really cool thing about this response is the blood around it, and that looks just awesome. Really on par with stuff I've seen in cutscenes and on pre-made bodies in video games. As you know, in many games you have really lousy wounds in the combat itself, but in the cutscenes, in the pre-made bodies, it looks very bloody and brutal. So that's basically what you have here, but you see it activated in the gameplay itself. So very much digging it.
I'm hurt.
The biggest issue with the wounds is the massive entry hole, which is just way over the top. And not to say the hole can't look great, it absolutely can, just look at this, it's basically horror movie material. But you shouldn't have something as big as this for a 9mm, or even most long rifles frankly. Shotgun from point blank? Absolutely, but this pistol? Not at all. Moving on to Gibsplat, you actually have the vanilla wounds while the character is alive. But post-mortally, you have the fleshy overlay activated as a non-dismembering response. Not a big fan of that. Next up is the mech dump, and once again, we begin with Litegibs. So what you'll see here is some particle blood, some deagles, and of course the non-dismembering response. You can dismember using the SMG, but that's gonna take a lot of rounds. And upping the damage multiplier did not help make dismemberment activate more easily, at least on my end. Moving on to next gen blood effects. So what you see here is a great deal of particle blood, a good amount of deagles, and of course, very nice responses on the character himself. The coolest thing here really is those deagles. They are the key to making the scene feel as messy as it does. The issues you will see here is of course the wound limit on the character and that black blood pool. But other than that, I really dig those stains and the character wounds. As for Gibsplat, as you can see it's mainly particle blood, but you can activate dismemberment much more easily. And to complete this carnage, let's send some characters flying. First up is Litegibs. Well, she didn't fly very far. Here's the moment the flight was over. Now we go over to next gen blood effects. This one is much like the drop test. Some droplets where the explosion happened, droplets where the character fell, and a blood pool. And, lastly, we have Gibsplat. This one just tears the character apart and sends chunks flying everywhere. Seriously, all over the place. If you wanna kill some time, perform this test and see how much of the character you can reassemble from the remains that you can find. So, in conclusion, each one of those mods offers really cool features that are not all too common in games. The very clear blood trails in Litegibs, awesome non-dismembering damage in next-gen blood effects, and just glorious partial dismemberment in Gibsplat 2. And I should mention that Sandbox, aka Garry's Mod 2, is currently in the making. It will be running on the Source 2 engine, and I'm really curious to see what will be the baseline response mechanics for it, but more so, where modders can take it. That's it for today. Let me know how you feel in the comment section, and if you enjoyed the video, subscribe and share it around. And consider supporting the channel on Patreon. For as low as $1 a month you get the impressions videos a week early, you get the interviews a week early, you help out the channel, and, if enough folks will chip in, the full review series will also return, with even more content variety. So a big thank you to all the Patreon members, and consider joining as well. Also, if you like the music you hear in the intro, outro, and in the background, a YouTube playlist and a Spotify one are in the description. Until next time.